Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the NFL Wire site from USA Today's NFL Wire, covering the Arizona Cardinals, of course. And my co-host, as is typically the case, is Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, the Arizona Cardinals site from SB Nation's family of sites, and also one of the hosts of the original Draft Breakdown podcast that now has some fun stuff going on as we look at the college season that has begun. We've got some fun things already as Georgia looks, oh my gosh, physical. And you've got some good games happening already. But here we are. It is week one. We are now officially in week one of the NFL season. We're recording on a Tuesday night, so in 48 hours, we will be watching the NFL season opener between the Cowboys and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And this is episode 324. Seth, how excited are you that the NFL season is finally here?
Very. I mean, it's going to be a fun time. This will be a long season, man. I mean, 17 games. It's going to be interesting watching this, how this unfolds, how careful coaches are with injuries. I know it's only an extra game, but I mean, it's going to make for a long season and a lot of interesting decisions. And the Cardinals, with a team that is, has some injury issues, it'll be interesting to see how they figure it out. And I think this is going to be one of the more interesting seasons for the Arizona Cardinals that we've seen, and definitely one of the more intriguing seasons that we've covered as part of this podcast.
Yeah, and well, in this edition of the show, what we've got some news about the Cardinals happening. So after we reacted to the final roster, they made a couple other roster moves, which led to Jordan Phillips lining on injured reserve again, and Robert Alpha and Justin Pugh being activated from the COVID reserve. So we're going to talk about that, and well, what are we to think? Is he already turning into a bust after 3 stints on IR in barely over a season? We will make some bold predictions and some reasonable predictions, and kind of what we expect and hope to see from the Cardinals this season, as well as some questions that they're facing. We will react to the latest depth chart, or the first depth chart of the regular season, and then look ahead to their week one matchup between the Titans, against the Titans this weekend on the road, give our preview matchups and our predictions for that game, which could be one heck of a barn burner. But so let's go ahead and get started. Jordan Phillips to injured reserve, which kind of, for me, honestly, kind of came out of left field and got me feeling, not again for a guy with so much promise when he signed last year. He was good in the games that he was healthy in, and then had the hamstring issue. He got hurt, battled through it for a week, tried to play on it against Seattle, injured it more, went on IR, came back, battled back, and then on the fumble run back against the Giants, he tweaked it again and didn't play the rest of the year. He was healthy in the offseason, like during OTAs and mini camps. He was fine. And then something happened in training camp. He was out. Then he caught COVID. He comes back from the COVID list. He's healthy again. He practices last Monday. And then the next thing we know, he makes the team naturally. But then on Thursday, when they activate Justin Pugh, they put Phillips on IR, which now explains why Michael Dogby made the final roster. But what were your thoughts once the news hit that Phillips hit IR again?
I was at first surprised that they obviously had that in the plan for how they built the roster with the way that they had that open roster spot, or the two open roster spots technically, and we were sitting there, or the one open roster spot, excuse me, and we were sitting there going, well, they got to make a move so they can bring Justin Pugh and Robert Alford off the COVID list, right? And why did they keep Michael Dogby? I mean, you and I are sitting here on this podcast
right,
having that conversation, and then Justin Pugh's elevated from the COVID-19 list, and by the way, we're putting Jordan Phillips on IR. And so those two things corresponded, and so clearly that was the plan all along. And when you look at it from that perspective, it's disappointing that a guy that had other questions about his, ability and things of that nature has been rendered a quote unquote bust. And let's be honest, so far he is a bust. Because of injuries, because as you kind of pointed out and wrote about today, he has not had injury problems in the NFL.
Right.
This isn't a sustained thing where he's gone through this his entire career. This is instead maybe a concern about dedication, maybe, and a want to be able to play through a little bit of pain. And we don't know what the injury is, so
that is the really hard thing about this, because like we said, like if it's the hamstring, I'm really concerned, because then it's become something chronic, because he had it hurt initially, battled back, injured it more, got healthy, injured it more, missed the season, and then missed the rest of the season. And so that's what I'm concerned. So I keep hearing people talk about that was a bad signing. Okay, if you look at the end result, it was a bad signing. It wasn't necessarily a bad signing. It was a kind of a risky signing, but it wasn't because of the injuries, not even because of the size. It wasn't even a bad contract in terms of the money. It's just been a really unfortunate one. It was risky to begin with because he had 1 year of production. That was the main thing. He had the 1 year of production, and in fairness, it was the first time he'd ever played in those passing downs. So he'd never been asked to play in passing downs before. He was always a guy that played in base and then came out for the guys that would rush the passer. And so it was the first time he was basically allowed to do that, and he was highly successful. And the tape said is that as well. He plays with high energy. He was dominant. He's strong. He's quick. But the fact of the matter is, it's just been really unfortunate, because if you don't look at his history, I went back dating his entire career. I looked at the game logs, and so he missed 4 games in his career before this year. He was inactive 1 week when he was a rookie, and he had an ankle injury that had him miss 3 games in 2017. Since 2017, in 2018 and 2019, when he was with the Bills, he did not have a single week where he was even listed with an injury designation in the final injury report. So he has been quite durable. He'd never had hamstring issues. So the times when he was on the injury report, it was a knee, it was an ankle, it was a shoulder. The ankle mostly. But the weird thing is that we don't know what this injury is because of how the Cardinals played it off, because they didn't disclose injuries during training camp. They put him on injured reserve before there was ever an injury report this year. It's the first one to come out on Wednesday, and they haven't talked about it since. And honestly, and I anticipate since this year you can come back after 3 weeks, that maybe we'll find out what the injury is, because he'll probably be limited 1 or 2 games, or simply they will activate him from injured reserve on a Friday after. But no, he'd have to. It'd be interesting because I think how it works is that you just I don't. At what point you're
we should find out what it is, but it's just unfortunate that we don't know what it is,
right?
And don't know how to react to it, basically.
But this thing is that they kind of need him, and as it is, the defensive line talent is there. There's so much talent, and there's high end talent, and there's solid depth talent between J.J. Watt and Jordan Phillips. Then you go with Rashard Lawrence, who's now the starting nose tackle, Zach Allen, Lecky Fotu, and even Michael Dogby. So there is some talent there. But like we had last year, there was one defensive lineman that played all 16 games, and he's not on the team anymore because the Cardinals let Angelo Blackson go. That defensive line was hit with injuries in the preseason. J.J. Watt missed time. Zach Allen missed time. Corey Peters didn't play at the preseason. We didn't really see him in training camp practice, but he was coming back from his injury. Lecky Fotu missed time. Rashard Lawrence missed time. Everyone they were counting on missed time. And so after last year, you're like, it can't happen again. And then in the training camp it's happening. You're like, I hope they're just getting this out of the way early, because defensive line, it ended up being a problem because they were, dressing guys off the street and were playing them. And guess what? That's not a good way to play defense.
No, it's not. And, that's the frustrating thing right now is that they have, as you said, a lot of talent at the defense line position, but there's so many question marks. I mean, you got J.J. Watt on a pitch count. We have Corey Peters that's going to be on an obvious pitch count early in the season, if he's even active early in the season. Let's be completely honest about that. Rashard Lawrence has dealt with injury issues. Zach Allen has dealt with injury issues. So you're basically rolling in with Michael Dogby and Lecky Fotu as your Ironman, so to speak.
And Lecky missed time last year, though he was super durable at Utah.
Yeah, and so you look at it, it's going to be just a question of durability for a lot of this team. And I think they're going to be very good. But that's one of the nagging questions that we've had all kind of off season, is dealing with, can these guys stay healthy? And the unfortunate reality so far is I shouldn't say every, but most of the guys we had questions about, the answer has been no. Now, hopefully, we don't want to jinx it. We're going to get to see Robert Alford play, and so that's a good thing. We're going to get to see J.J. Watt and Zach Allen play, and those are good things. But now the question is, can they maintain and stay healthy? And that's another question that I think it's fair to ask, and obviously waiting to see the answer is the big thing at this point.
Yep, and luckily we get to see that initially this week, and they'll be playing a talented and loaded Titans offense. We're going to talk more about the Titans later on the show, but coming up next on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web, we will move on to some bold predictions, some reasonable predictions, and some questions that we have about the Cardinals. We kind of alluded to it now. That's coming next on Rise Up Sea Red. Legal sports betting is coming to Arizona. In fact, it is on the 9th. So by the time you listen to the show, it might already be here. September 9th, it is live. So imagine how much more fun watching a game will be when you have a little bit of money on the line. And the best way to get into that action is with the DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. And to celebrate, DraftKings Sportsbook is giving you $150 free bet for just showing up. That's for you guys, listeners of the Rise of Sea Red podcast. That is a $150 free bet just for signing up today, and there's no deposit required. It's not like other situations where that your deposit is matched or doubled or whatever it is. This is simply a free bet. DraftKings is bringing their experience as a leader in daily fantasy sports to the sports betting world and have created America's top-rated sportsbook app, DraftKings Sportsbook. So, what I want you to do is to download the top-rated DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use the code DRYHEAT, all one word, DRYHEAT, when you sign up. Those who sign up right now will receive a $150 free bet to use once mobile sports betting hits Arizona, which is later this week. Again, that's code DRYHEAT and get that free bet, $150 instantly. Only at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. Gambling problem, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP, 21 plus, Arizona only. Free bet expires 7 days from date of issuance. Eligibility restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for details, subject to regulatory licensing requirements. Back on the Rise of Sea Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's talk predictions, bold, reasonable questions that they have, and kind of what our outcomes and our expectations are for this coming season. I wrote a piece for Cards Wire, if you haven't seen it already, where I wrote, I think it was 6 bold but reasonable, so bold but possible predictions. These were best case scenarios, but they're not super crazy. They are things that could viably happen, but seem just a little bit on the bold side to actually make as predictions. And so I have a few things that I think could be extremely good. And let's start with one, Kyler Murray. I think what is very possible. So he's the first player to ever pass for 3,500 yards and rush for 750. We saw that he just missed 4,000 yards. He was, a dual threat by all means when he was in college. He still is. I think 1,000 yards rushing is probably not going to happen this year. Based on kind of comments, I think they want to rely on his legs less. However, I think it is completely reasonable that he can reach 5,000 combined yards between passing and rushing. And I don't even think that that's even that bold.
No, and I think the goal this year should be to have a combined 5,040.
Yes.
So 5,000 total yards from scrimmage, either passing and rushing, and then 40 total touchdowns.
And he was close last year. He was at about what? About 4,800, 4,837.
Right, and so that's an improvement. I'll say if he can flip about 400 yards rushing to passing, and be there. With that opportunity, I think that's where you want him to be. Obviously, if he ends up at over 800-900 yards rushing again, and it's from effective usage of him, that's fine. But we're hoping this year it's not. It's more designed runs and less scramble yards, and that's not to say that his scrambling ability is not important. It's just that we would prefer that
we'd hope that the passing
offensive
game
line
opens up.
Yeah, the offensive line is better, that the passing game opens up a little more.
Yeah, absolutely. If I wanted to be crazy, I think a bolder but little less reasonable is to predict him to go 4,000, 1,000, which has never been done in the NFL. I think the 4,000's a lock. He would have hit 4,000 last year if he hadn't missed most of the Rams game. He was at 39.71. And especially with the 17th game, I think 4,000 yards is a lock. Honestly, with increased passing production overall, I would hope that he could reach the realms of about 4,500, which would increase his kind of per game instead of just adding on what his average was. but increase his per
Right.
game average to get that to about 4,500, which would make 5,000 total yards totally easy to do.
Well,
Between the two.
and that's and that's what it should be. It should be about five. You should be right around the 4,500 yard mark for passing, and you should see between 500 and 600 yards rushing. I mean, that's just
That's totally reasonable. What would be a bold prediction that you could see happening this year?
That the Cardinals have over 3,000 yards rushing.
Ooh, juicy. That one's a good one.
That would mean that obviously Chase Edmonds and James Conner run the ball effectively, but then they're able to utilize Murray and Rondell Moore in the rushing game as well, and really kind of, that would put them right around, over 200 yards per game, and that's a dominant rushing attack in the NFL. We've seen that happen with the Baltimore Ravens the last couple of seasons. Not to say that we expect Kyler to run as much or anything like that, but I think we could see a rushing attack that lends itself with all of the weapons they have. Like I said, they've got legitimately 4 guys that can rush for over 600 yards each.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see. I think a reasonable big expectations, if we want to talk about Chase Edmonds alone, I think a reasonable solid year for him would be 1,500 total yards for scrimmage.
Total yards, yeah. I'd agree with that because you're talking about maybe he gets to 1,000, and let's be honest, 1,000 yards rushing is not going to be,
especially in 17 games. I mean, so if you bring that up to 17 games as it was before, that's averaging about 66 yards a game. Add another game. Hey, let's do a little bit of quick math here. That's 59 yards a game.
Yeah, so that's if you're talking about 60 yards a game, and then another basically 35 yards a game, or no, it'd be 30 yards a game receiving. That doesn't sound like a lot, but 90 yards from scrimmage a game, I think, will get him to 1,500, and that should be his goal for the season. And if you get that from him, and then you maybe add in 700 yards rushing from James Conner, I think you're at a more realistic pace, and you had an effective and useful rushing attack on the season.
Bold, possible 3 1,000-yard receivers. That would mean an explosion in the passing, which is honestly kind of what they're hoping for. We know that Hop's going to get his. The question is, can we get A.J. Green back to that level? And can Christian Kirk reach that level? The last time we saw it from the Cardinals, it was 2009 when they had Fitz, Bolden, and Steve Breston. And Steve Breston barely got that 1,000 yards in that last game. But again, 17 games means for more production. They have a better offensive line. They have a better receiving core. I think I don't think that'll get triple 1,000, but that's be something that would be a big but possible scenario.
Yeah, and I think that's one of those things where you again look at it, and your expectation for Hopkins is 1,200 yards, maybe 1,300 now because it's a 17 game season, and then if you're right around 800 to 900 for those other guys, then you're on the right pace, and then you just need maybe one big game from each of them to get them over 1,000 yards, and I don't think it's inconceivable. I'm not going to say it's going to happen because that's even though it's a 17 game season, that's a big jump in terms of secondary receiver production that we haven't seen it yet enough to predict it, but it's a fair, like you said, bold prediction.
What would be something? So let me go with another one, and this is kind of dual about sacks, and that would be Chandler Jones leading the league in sacks, even Defensive Player of the Year. I think that's it's the on the bold end, and that the Cardinals lead the league in sacks. I think that's not even that crazy
No,
considering the personnel they've got.
no, and I was going to say one of mine was going to be that the Cardinals lead the league in sacks this year. Um, Again, this is all health permitting, but it's a little different when you talk about the Cardinals. You're talking about, obviously JJ Watt, who's had health issues. You're talking about Zach Allen, who's had health issues. Then you're talking about, uh, Dennis Gardeck and Chandler Jones both coming off season ending injuries last year. Those are, that's different. But if ideally Marcus Golden is your third best pass rusher, man, you're talking about 3 10+ sack guys easy if JJ can and Chandler can stay healthy.
And add into, so if you got 3 guys with double digit sacks, if Jordan Phillips can play the rest of the season healthy, you're looking 5 to between 5 and 8. You get a couple here and there, 2 to 4 from other guys. Isaiah Simmons and Zach, Zayvon Collins, who went on their blitzes. A couple of corners, pick one up. Yeah, they could viably lead the NFL in sacks this year. And Chandler Jones, this would be one of those special type years. So it could be one of those things where the help on defense hurts him in terms of sacks, or maybe it helps him. Like overall, I think the sack production is going to be up, but you could either see that extra help means that the other guys get sacks that he doesn't get, or the help means that they can't focus as much on him, and he has a bounce back year, leads the leagues in sacks. I think it'll be hard. Defensive Player of the Year will be hard. I honestly don't know how he didn't win Defensive Player of the Year back in 2017 when he led the league in sacks, tackles for loss, and quarterback hits. It was just one of what? How is that? How did that not happen? But that would be one of those things that could, but I don't think will happen.
Yeah, and I would agree with you there that I don't see a Defensive Player of the Year happening, but between Chandler and Buda Baker, they've got 2 guys that could potentially be Defensive Players of the Year, and then you've got Zayvon Collins, who could potentially be a Rookie of the Year, because here's why. And
he's going to play a heck of a lot.
Well, he's going to play a heck of a lot, but also there's no great rookie pass rushers. And so when you historically look at the Rookie of the Year for defense, it's typically a pass rusher. And so this season, he's going to get, as Jess said, so many snaps and opportunities that from a bulk statistical standpoint, he may put up such big numbers this year that it's hard to overlook him.
And let's not forget, if we want to talk about something bold, is if Isaiah Simmons could end up being in the mix for that Defensive Player of the Year because of the ability he has to honestly do so many things, like pick up sacks, stack up the tackles, pass deflections, interceptions. He could have one of this. Now, again, we're just kind of going through like best case scenarios for kind of everybody, but these are things that could happen.
Yeah, but also, I mean, to your point, they're best case scenario, but there are things that could happen in those best case scenarios. It's not like we're saying Kyler Murray throws for 65 touchdowns. I mean, we're not. We're saying best case scenario, he's got over 5,000 yards and 40 total touchdowns, like 5,000 total yards and 40 total touchdowns. So those are, best case scenario type things. So, but yeah, I mean, you look at the defense, they're going to have opportunities for that transpire, just because I think that between the injuries and the fact that they're playing in a division where you're going to see a lot of throwing of the football, you're going to have a chance. And a lot of tight games that you're going to see these guys, have a chance to produce.
Absolutely. Anything else that would come up for you in terms of bold prediction? So I honestly, bold prediction, not a prediction. I think this team has a Super Bowl ceiling. I've said it. I've said it. I think on this show and on other radio shows and podcasts. I think the entire NFC West has a Super Bowl ceiling. I think all 4 teams are that talented. It's just a matter of things coming together. And I think the Cardinals could be a Super Bowl team. They could be that sort of special, have that sort of special season. That's possible.
Yeah, and my bold prediction would be that this team does make the playoffs this year and competes. And I know some people are saying, well, they better make the playoffs. I mean, they play in the best division of football. The NFC is going to be a hotly contested, conference overall, and I think they're a team that is in that mix and ends up making the playoffs.
Yeah. In terms of your realistic ceiling floor, what do you see this team being? Best case, worst case?
Best case, I think they're an NFC championship type of team. I don't know if they can win that. It's really hard to bet against Tom Brady. From a historic standpoint, it's very difficult to bet against Tom Brady. And so that's not copping out, but it's just like when we would do our season previews before, and then we would just always pick the Patriots. Like it's until Father Time finally wins that battle with Tom Brady, I'm always going to pick Tom Brady. And that's just how that goes. So, but other than that, I think the realistic, or the best case scenario is this is a team that has a chance to play for a Super Bowl. Either a berth in the Super Bowl or in the game. But I think they've got that kind of talent and ability. And I think we'll find out early. That's the nice thing too, is like they've got a really tough start, and it doesn't mean they need to go 6-0 to start. But if they go 3-3 or better, even 4-2, I think you're going to be able to tell a lot about this team. My worst case scenario, I think this is easy to preface, but I would say this is the only fair way to truly do this is if you don't factor in injuries. Because if you factor in injury to like a Kyler Murray, or you've got J.J. Watt and Chandler Jones, and guys that are still hurting, that were hurt last year, it's going to be really hard for this team to be good. But you can say that about any team. I mean, if you take away Russell Wilson, they're dumpster
fire.
And so I'll say this: if no injuries involved, a worst case scenario is that this team ends up flaming out because Cliff can't figure it out, and Vance Joseph is not a good defensive coordinator, and they end up going 5-12, and we're discussing in January who the next head coach and GM of the Arizona Cardinals is going to be.
Yeah. I think reasonably this team is between, like, worst case 8-9, where they sort of miss out and they end up being a middling team. I don't think this team is going to be bad, like I've seen some of the scenarios. This team is better than last year's team. Their talent, I know it doesn't always mean more wins, but they upgraded basically every position. They were a Zane Gonzalez missed field goal in New England from making the postseason a year ago. And so a better team, I don't see how they end up with the worst results, especially how we saw them play for much of the year. I think what they were doing in the middle of the season is more predictive of what they have moving forward, rather than the last several games when when they were handcuffed by Kyler Murray playing a little hesitant, or Cliff Kingsbury, kind of protecting Kyler. And so I think the middle part of the season is more predictive of what we were going to see this year. So I think worst case they're going to be a middling team with 8 wins. I think they could be I think they could be this year's Buffalo Bills. They could win it. I think they can make it all the way. Like I said, I think they could always make it all the way to the Super Bowl. I think predicting a Super Bowl win, like they could win the Super Bowl, but getting to the Super Bowl, I think they're talented enough with everything going right that this team could roll through the NFC and be like the 49ers were a couple of years ago, surprisingly good.
Yeah, and I mean, the big thing is, and you hit it on the head, they could be similar to the Buffalo Bills this year. And, year 3 of Kyler, you see the same type of jump in him that you saw in Josh Allen, where he's a legitimate MVP candidate. You look at what this team needs to do and kind of how they follow. I think that should be the goal, and I think anything less than 10 wins, barring serious injuries, has to be looked at as a disappointing season for this organization.
Absolutely. Coming up next on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. We move forward to this week. The Cardinals released their first depth chart of the season. We have some things to talk about. We're going to react to that. That's coming up next on Rise Up C-Red. We're back on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's talk about this depth chart. The depth chart came out this week, and, well, what we've got is kind of a couple of surprises, and the biggest takeaway, number one, is who the starting right guard is, and that is Josh Jones. It's not Brian Winters. It's not Justin Murray. It is Josh Jones, who was only playing right guard for most of the preseason and training camp because of injuries to Brian Winters and Justin Murray. I know that that was always a possibility because of what was said all offseason. They kind of made it a point to say that Josh Jones can play guard. Josh Jones can play guard. Let's be honest, Josh Jones has never played guard before training, before this offseason. And now he's the starter. Well, how surprised were you?
Based on the play, not surprised. Based on what we know of Sean Kugler and Cliff Kingsbury, I was a little surprised. Just because you expect them, not expect, but you just assume that Brian Winters signing was signaling that he was going to be the right guard, similar to the J.R. Sweezy signing a couple years ago, and it's not a bad thing. But Jones winning it's big for, obviously now he has to play well, and that's on him, but it's big for the organization and especially the drafting portion of that organization, because that's something that they haven't done well, throughout the Steve Keim era. And so now, if you're talking about 2 second-year players in Isaiah Simmons and Josh Jones starting, and then 3 rookies with Zaven Collins.
It's 3 second year because Rashard Lawrence is also.
Rashard Lawrence, 3 second year and 2 rookies. That's what I meant. And then you've got Marco Wilson and Zaven Collins starting. That's 5 starters from the last 2 draft classes. Now they have to play well. Them starting is obviously the initial spot, but if they play well, man, that's a massive turn of events after you look at 2016 and 17.
Right. I wonder. So I was surprised, not because of the play, but because of everything I saw from the offseason. Everything I heard suggested that Brian Winters was going to be the starter. And I've got a couple of theories. I've got a couple of theories where it comes to Josh Jones, and one is simply this: Brian Winters supposedly played through an injury last year, and Cliff Kingsbury talked about that. So he was playing through an injury. He sort of suggested that it's the same injury that he was dealing with in training camp, and they were trying to get him healthy. So in part, with the time missed and perhaps the injury being an issue, they feel that a healthy Josh Jones is better than a not as healthy Brian Winters, and that's something we might see change over the course of the year. That said, and I texted you this earlier, I'm not one to be. I am sort of anti-conspiracies when it comes to the Cardinals and things like that. But I'm starting to see some signs that might have, especially kind of how it feels. The Josh Jones moves kind of puts like, well, maybe this is it. And this is that Steve Keim kind of has put, and we saw it with Zaven Collins. There was a mandate to play Zaven Collins from day one. I believe that perhaps Keim is pulling the strings a little bit and insisting that the young guys play. If there is any closeness to the competition, let the young guys play. Which, and this goes against what my thought was last year, and I didn't want to speculate on the situation with Malcolm Butler. Albert Brio from SI.com in a mailbag suggested, quasi-reported, that the Cardinals had been concerned about Butler's running ability. Like, basically, he'd lost a step, and he might be almost washed up. Essentially, I'm not going to say, but that he'd lost his legs, and so they were worried that over the course of these, that was going to continue. Which initially, guess what? To me, that is the reason why he was cornerback 3. Cornerback 3 is not a bad position. That's a starting job. But if you look at how he was used on the depth chart, he was cornerback 1. He was all through the preseason. But as I saw in the offseason, as we saw in training camp, and as we saw in the preseason, it was Robert Alford and Byron Murphy, and Butler would come in nickel downs. And so if you have concerns about the long-term use over the course of a season of the guy's legs, hey, you take 35 to 45% of the snaps away so that he's going to be better over the course of the year. That said, if we kind of look at a lot of things, okay, there is definitely the instruction. Zaven Collins is the week 1 starter. Jordan Hicks didn't even get the opportunity to compete. Then suddenly Butler retires. We don't know why. Marco Wilson, the rookie, is a starter now. He's that cornerback 3. And now Josh Jones is starting. Perhaps that Keim is saying, and kind of, push the coaches to say, we like what we've seen from Wilson. He needs to play. And now, so he needs to play, Collins needs to play, and now Jones needs to play. So now we've got a little bit of a pattern. And perhaps Butler was displeased with that. It doesn't make complete sense because you have to be really convicted as a football player to say, if that's the motivation for retiring, to walk away from $3.25 million. Because guess what? You can still get paid $3.25 million and have a small role, like kind of what they would do with Jonathan Joseph when he was on the team. So they'd have, before he got hurt, they'd bring him in certain scenarios as a dime corner. You could do that. But I'd like to think that it probably wasn't that, but there are enough signs that perhaps Keim is imposing his will more than we've kind of seen him do in years past. Cliff Kingsbury subtly alluded to the fact that it sounds like Steve Keim was the one that had final roster decisions when it came to cutting and keeping players. So there is that. I'm not a guy that comes up with these kind of theories often, but now there's just enough that I think that that's possible. They're saying, play the young guys.
And you and I were talking about this off the air a little bit, and if that's the case, it would kind of make sense too if there was kind of a handshake backroom deal, like, hey, you guys have 2 years, like. You've got 2 years to prove that this is a team, that is a Super Bowl contending team, and you guys, and it's the whole group. It's Keim, it's Cliff, it's Kyler. Hey, you got 2 years. You're either contenders and we're going to extend you, or this is a complete blowout and rebuild. So play the young guys. Play my guys. Cliff because I don't want to go down on the ship because I was afraid to play the young guys. I don't want to go down on the ship with Brian Winters as the, as the guy that maybe was the final nail in my coffin. Like if it's Josh Jones, if it's Rondell Moore, if it's, Byron Murphy, if it's those guys, okay, I can live with that. But I don't want to go down with journeymen, veteran journeymen who are true stopgap types that are the reason that this team didn't make it or failed or floundered.
And we were talking about honestly, I maybe it's just we've kind of avoided because there are certain other shows and people around the media who take every opportunity to take shots at the leadership of the organization. But here's the thing that's kind of interesting. If I recall, 2022 will be both Keim and Kingsbury's last year of their contract, which makes this very interesting in the fact that this really is a make or break year because Bidwell then has a critical decision to make. If they don't make the playoffs, do you want to, are you going to do the Jerry Jones thing and kind of let them be lame ducks and make them kind of both play out that last year and see what happens? Or they're going to be in a situation where you're going to either have to extend both or cut ties depending on the results of the season. And that's kind of the thing. I wonder if that is, like you were saying, Keim is telling Cliff, hey, we're in this together, so here, play my guys, play these young guys, and we're gonna. I got you all these other veterans at certain positions to help, but now we've got some young guys that we like. We need to play them.
Yeah, and it would make sense, and if that's where they're at least they're all in lockstep and in it together. Like we said, we don't know what this is. Our, I think, reasonable speculation, and that's the thing is. One of the things that has been missing is a vision and kind of a solidarity, and it seems like they're finally getting to that spot, and that they're understanding each other and kind of have each other's back type things. And I think that's big because it's one of the reasons that good organizations are successful is that they're in it together and they take each other, one, they hold each other accountable, but two, that they give each other basically the belief in one another and say, hey, I got you, Josh Jones has earned this spot. Like he's our right guard, and then in a turn, it's like, hey, I know we drafted Andy, I know we drafted Hakeem, but I need a wide receiver. Get me a Rondell Moore, get me that type of player. And Keim, responds in that way. So I think that's where they're at now, and it seems like they're on the same page for the first time, which is big.
Yeah, it's that other depth chart thing. So it wasn't only Josh Jones. Minor things, honestly. These are minor things. Among the starters, no real surprise, except maybe Rashard Lawrence getting the start over Corey Peters, although Rashard Lawrence has been running with the first team all off season. Demetrius Harris is now your tight end 2 over Darrell Daniels. That's perfect, right? Demetrius Harris is a tight end 2, and Darrell Daniels is a perfect tight end 3. Eno Benjamin is still running back 4, but might be the starting kick returner. Other than that, I look at Tay Gowan, like those people who are huge Tay Gowan fans, and there are some staunch Tay Gowan fans on Twitter who think that he's going to be starting. Like, no, he's the back. They like him. He's the very back of the depth chart. He's behind a kid like Luke Barku, who honestly probably none of us ever heard of before they signed him.
Right, and I'd be surprised if Gowan was active on game days.
Right.
And again, that's not a shot at him. I just think that's the realistic expectation in year one. He didn't play last year. He had a phenomenal, 2019. But he's got work to do, and he's his first year back in playing. I think they like him. That's why they kept him. I think they see something in him, but they're not going to to go back. They're not going to lose the season because they played Tay Gowan too quickly.
Right. Anything else of note for you on the depth chart that you saw?
I am interested to see who returns kicks, if it's or Rondell Moore, because they're both listed. So I mean, they'll both be back there probably, but who's the guy that's kind of
if there's
going to take it?
Anything that we've learned from the depth chart for the last 2 years with Cliff Kingsbury is that it doesn't matter, at least especially for it doesn't matter what's on there. They don't tell the media relations exactly what it is. They kind of say, go with this, and then you'll see it play out differently on the field for 2 weeks, and then you will see a change in the depth chart. So, like, how many times did Andy Isabella get listed as the kick returner or Christian Kirk as the punt returner? Neither one of them were significant contributors at either one of those spots last year. They kind of went all over the place with both. So, especially with the return positions, I don't know what to think. I'm going to have to guess that Moore is probably going to do it. Or they might just go with the Eno with kicks and Rondell with punts.
Yeah, and that would be fun. Two exciting young guys. Eno looked significantly quicker in the preseason.
Yeah, he was exciting to watch. Coming up next on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's come back and talk about the Tennessee Titans. Especially what can we see, kind of our preview for that. So that's coming next on Rise Up C-Red. We're back on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now we move forward to week 1, the actual game. They will be taking on the Tennessee Titans, a team that has a scary good offense, as scary good as the Cardinals offense could be. We already know that the Titans offense is great. They averaged over 30 points a game last season. Ryan Tannehill has really, really emerged. And if you recall the preview interview that I had with Mike Moritas with Titans Wire back about a month or so ago, the success of Derrick Henry, like the booming success of Derrick Henry, actually coincides with Ryan Tannehill. So as much as Tannehill's success has been with Derrick Henry's game took off when Ryan Tannehill took over, and now they add Julio Jones to that lineup. Just how good is that offense going to be this year?
It's really going to come down to the offensive line. They're talented. I mean, from a skill position standpoint, they're maybe the best skill team in the NFL. Obviously, they don't have every single position loaded, as they're starting Jeff Swaim at tight end, who's a nice player, don't get me wrong, but I mean, he's equivalent.
They like him enough. They did honestly like him enough to move on from Jonnu Smith. Now, granted,
right.
Part of that is money, but he is a guy they, in fact, like.
Yeah, and I mean, he's a 7-year veteran. He's been decent for them. His career highs, are 26 catches and 242 yards. So, he's pretty close to Max Williams in terms of what they ask him to do and what he does well. That's not a bad thing. But you look at it, they're loaded for bear with Josh Jones, Julio Jones, AJ Brown, and even adding Josh Reynolds in as their third wide receiver is a nice touch. And then they have the top running back in the NFL in Derrick Henry. So when you look at it from that perspective, they're a really difficult team to match up with. The equalizer might be along the offensive line. Obviously Taylor Lewan is a very, very talented player, but he is, getting up there in age. That's not to say he's gonna not be still a solid player, but he's 30 now. Um, he's dealt with some injuries over the last couple of years, so those are things to watch. You know, Roger Saffold has not lived up to the contract he signed. Remember, you and I were hoping that he would sign here as well. He had a nice season last year, but it wasn't nearly um, as good as his year in 2018 with the Rams. Uh, and then on the right side, they're trying to figure it out. They've got both Ty Sambrailo and Kendrell Lamb listed as the right tackle starters. Um, if he turns out, or it'll be interesting to see. Sambrailo's really struggled in the NFL, and I don't even, if I'm being honest, really know who Kendall Lamb is. He's looks like a veteran kind of journeyman. Looking undrafted free agent, 27 starts. So yeah, I mean, he's a guy.
They also have two of their starters on the COVID list, as they kind of had a COVID outbreak recently. Brandon Tannehill just came off. Ben Jones and Nate Davis, I believe they're both slated to return this week, but as of today, I believe as of Tuesday, we're still on the list.
And the matchup is going to come down to this: which defense can get a stop. And the reason
Yes.
I say that is you look at the Titans defense, their starters along the front, Danico Autry, Tierre Tart, I'm not sure.
Never heard of them.
Jeffrey Simmons, Bud Dupree, Jayon Brown, Rashawn Evans, and Harold Landry. Bud Dupree's in the Jordan Phillips realm, I guess we can say, in terms of one-hit wonders. Not quite as, I mean, he
was a 1.5 hit wonder because he had the 11 sacks, and then he had I think it was 8.5 in those 11 games before he tore his ACL. So he was a 1.5 hit wonder, but he did follow that up at least, and he's hoping he's planning on playing in week 1. I don't think it is exactly certain 100% yet.
And then you've got Harold Landry, who's been okay. I mean, he hasn't been anything special to write home about. Rashawn Evans is really kind of their anchor in the middle. He's been a nice player, but I don't know if he's exactly lived up to being a first round pick, as in 3 seasons, no Pro Bowls or anything like that. That's not to say that's the be all end all, but he hasn't exactly been that great. And then Jeffrey Simmons the same way. So, they've had some struggles to fill that pass rush role. They liked Jeffrey Simmons coming out of Mississippi State. Obviously, he had the knee injury. Played sparingly in 2019. Looked a little bit better last year, but I mean, we're talking about 5.5 sacks. In a full season. No, I think he did play all 15 or 16 games. He started 15 of them, but he only had 3 sacks last year. I apologize. And so when you look at it, they're just defensively, they, for whatever reason, cannot find the pieces to match what the offense does. They're starting Janoris Jenkins at one of the cornerback positions opposite rookie Christian Fulton. Second year man Christian Fulton. Big fan of Fulton. Didn't play a whole lot last year, only 6 games. So, he's again young, inexperienced, and then you've got Janoris Jenkins, who's been kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Washed up the last couple stops on his career tour. So that's the key to this game, is if the Cardinals, now don't get me wrong, this is broad spectrum and things of that nature, but if the Cardinals defense can live up to the expectations and get stops, there's not a whole lot that I expect Tennessee to do well defensively to frustrate the Cardinals. So
Yeah,
it's
it's interesting because I think I saw Kyle Odegaard that Football Outsiders has like the Titans defense is the worst rated one they project for this coming season. Which, if the Cardinals can get 2 stops, that might be enough.
right, and that's where you go to with this whole thing. And when you look at it from that perspective, the Cardinals defense is going to be the key of this game, because unless the offense just completely falters and falls flat on its face, like you said, you're talking about 1 to 2 stops a half that you're hoping to be able to get with these Tennessee Titans, or against these Tennessee Titans. And your expectation is that the defense won't be able to stop the Arizona Cardinals offense in the same breath. This is a tough game. I mean, Derrick Henry is such a special and unique talent. You add Julio Jones to the mix with an offense that's been playing at a high level the last couple of years since Ryan Tannehill was inserted as the starter. It's really hard to pick against Tennessee as the home team. However, I think you and I both agree it's odd that they're only 2.5-point favorites at home.
Right? And I think that it is all about that defense. They do, honestly. They've got the talent offense. It's going to be interesting to see how the scheme works, because they did lose their offensive coordinator. So Arthur Smith was kind of the architect of that. The architect of the success that they had. So now they add in Julio Jones, but everyone is learning a new system to some extent, which is going to be interesting to see how that goes. Firepower they have in spades, which it's especially in week 1 when you really haven't gotten into a real groove, unless the Cardinals defense somehow comes out and is special early. They do have the potential to be special. I like some of the matchups there. I think, Chandler Jones against Taylor Lewan is going to be fun to watch. But what might be the key is how productive Marcus Golden is on the other side. And then, of course, like you look on also in the defenses, can the young linebackers make plays in the running game?
Yeah, and that's going to be a key thing is, can the Cardinals get pressure? The Titans have historically done a really good job of moving Ryan Tannehill, who's a very good athletic quarterback, moving Ryan Tannehill around. Now, I don't want this to get taken out of context, but they do a lot of things similar to what Seattle does with Russell Wilson in terms of moving him so he's not pressured. So the Cardinals are going to, as you stated, have to be successful with their linebackers against Derrick Henry in the running game, but they're also going to have to find a way to pressure a guy in Tannehill who isn't sacked a whole lot and
can move.
Yeah, and is able to avoid sacks when he is pressured. So that to me is going to be the key to the game, because it's hard to stop Derrick Henry. It really is hard. But if the Cardinals can get consistent pressure and timely sacks on Ryan Tannehill and get off the field on third downs, that's going to give the Cardinals the offense a chance to really put points on the board. This Titans team is going to score points. They're probably going to average over 30 points a game this year. So I want, in one hand, I'm saying that, the Cardinals can do these things. But in the end, I expect this to be a shootout in the realm of, 37-35.
Yeah. Is that kind of how you're going? I think I'm going to predict. I can't remember if I had the Cardinals winning this game, because it is hard to win on the road in week 1. There's extra juice in the stadium, especially this year when there's going to be fans in the stadium. And so I still think the Cardinals offense is going to do great against that defense, and that the Cardinals defense will do enough. I'll say 37-31 Cardinals.
Yeah, and I'm going to say the Cardinals sneak this one out 37-35.
Awesome. And obviously we will you'll find out Sunday afternoon if we're morons or not when it comes to our selections. But with that will end this edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals Talk of the Web, episode 323. I don't know if I said that at the beginning. I might have said 324. It's 323. We will be back, of course, next week. The way things are going, we're back to weekly shows up until probably the off season. So that's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. We'll be back again next week, hopefully talking about a Cardinals win.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red, See Red, and of course, Rise Up, See Red.
Rise up!